certainly overwhelmingly what we're being told is that the community consultation, as you guys see it, hasn't been good enough in your minds. The other concern is we understand council is looking forward in terms of what extra needs there are for further staffing arrangements, but when Bendigo, which is a similar population size, has admin costs that are 60% of their rate revenue and Ballarat's is 69% of rate revenue, we ask what extra services we're getting for that extra cost. Construction cost. I mean, essentially, out of the $40 million, we take away $8 million for the car park. So it's really a $32 million construction, because well, $27 million on building it and $5 million on demolishing the site, preparing the site, that kind of thing. So in total, it costs $32 million. Now, when the building known as the ATO building at Geelong, because ATO is the major tenant in that building, Centrelink's the other tenant, that's a 7,000 square metre building, and that was built for $13.5 million. This one here that Council's talking about is 6,500 square metres, so slightly smaller than the ATO building, which was $13.5 million. I don't know if Craig William is here today or not, but he's a developer that was looking at building in Ballarat a 6,000 square metre building and had written guarantee from a reputable builder of $12.75 million. So, you know, the question has come up from some people of, well, why are we paying so much more per square metre? Renovation of Civic Hall, is it possible? Is it possible to do something, as James was highlighting, as Sam McIntosh has talked about, as Gary Fitzgerald has asked about in open chamber? Is it possible? Is it worth looking at? Cost of servicing debt. Has there been an overvaluation of assets? What is the opportunity cost? That is, what else could we spend that money on rather than just offices for offices? What does the community miss out on? I mean, I've heard so many people say that you know, footpaths are poor, roads are full of potholes, streetlights are inadequate. This is the basic stuff. We're servicing a debt, or I shouldn't say we, council servicing a debt at $1 million a year, so it's $1 million a year taken out of roads, footpaths, etc. So when we're servicing a debt for another, you know, 20, 30 years, what else are we missing out on for how long? And I've had a lot of people raise eyebrows about the idea of this community advisory panel. And I've certainly made a comment that I think the only part of it that's community is the name. None of them are here today. And I don't know in what way they are meant to facilitate things, or we're meant to reach them, or whatever. And maybe Mark can clarify, because maybe I'm not up to speed on it, but while the intention may be appropriate, it doesn't seem to have worked so far. Economic impact. I'm an economist, and I had trouble following some of the logic here. I used to do this kind of thing before I was an academic, and I never calculated economic impact in terms of jobs, because you actually can't say we're creating jobs. The calculations are meant to say you're creating full-time equivalent jobs, because you work out how many hours are involved, and that doesn't mean it's a guaranteed job. It means it's a full-time equivalent. Someone might be working 20% over, and if you've got 5 people working 20% more hours, that's said to be one full-time equivalent job, but it actually doesn't guarantee an extra person gets employed. And also, I did try twice to get this information, and in fairness, the director did say I could have a face-to-face appointment, but I didn't have time this week, but I was actually after some written material. And I suspect, but Mark may be able to clarify, that it's just been a standard multiplier table that's been used, in which case This is just during construction phase. Those 265 full-time equivalent jobs, well, I'm calling them full-time equivalent because they're not real jobs, it's a national multiplier, so it doesn't mean that they're local. They could be in Melbourne, unless a different system has been used, which I'm not privy to, but it is when construction is complete. I even asked, some of you may have heard of Chris Richardson, who's the nation's best economist. I even asked him, am I missing something? Is there some economic benefits that can be derived from this after construction? And he said no. And he also said if you want to look for examples of spending too much money, you only need to look at councils. And he said $40 million is too much for the population size. And the other one that's come through is just the role of council. Is it appropriate that they take on the role of a developer? Essentially, another developer is now not proceeding on the basis of this, which means that I guess really when we're talking about this economic impact, we should delete whatever was going to be generated from Craig Williams' project to have a fair sum. And if others have walked away for viability, then why is it now viable because the ratepayers are paying for it? So this is a collection of questions that I'm putting forward. Some of you sitting here may have provided some of that, and I thank you for providing questions and concerns so that we've got this nice summary.
From the outset, congratulations to all of you who have taken an interest in my past role. I was an activist as an advisory person to the local council down in the Otway Shire. It is important that the community becomes involved in council decisions, council actions, their long-term strategies, and obviously the impact of costs to you as a ratepayer for any significant investments they make. And this is a big, significant investment, and that's why I've taken an interest. My interest here in relation to the Civic Hall development site was born out of a meeting actually I had, and I should acknowledge obviously Anthony Schink here as well from the Ballarat City Council. And Anthony was actually part of a group of presenters from council to me, a Minister for Regional Cities, Dennis Napthine, many, many months ago in relation to revitalisation of the CBD. And I do congratulate the council. It is important that we do acknowledge some of the work that you support in their endeavours to do the best they can for this city. And I think revitalisation of the CBD is an important part of the business that council needs to do, and certainly on your behalf should be able to communicate that need. But I looked at that and I thought actually it had some merit, the revitalisation. I thought it was important as a sort of a larger strategy for council, particularly in the inner city. However, when I saw the proposed Civic Hall development site, I did have some concern, and it's been raised here already, and I'm sure it'll be raised this afternoon, so I won't go into detail, but it's more about, from my perspective, should council become developers? And I've actually flagged this with my contemporaries across the political landscape, and it's unusual. Not that it doesn't happen, but it is unusual for council to invest a significant amount of sums of money to become developers themselves. And perhaps more unusual that they invest a significant amount of sums into council offices for themselves. And I guess no doubt questions will be raised with councillors today about how they can satisfy, I think, your concerns in relation to why should councils themselves be developers to invest and build and develop council offices for their own staff. Now, we have put some viability and feasibility conditions around that transfer of land. And I understand in the last council meeting, and councillors can bring me up to date on this, I haven't had a conversation with them yet, that there has been discussion within council, in camera, out of camera, in relation to the viability of the development site. So, from my perspective, that's where I can play a big role. Obviously, the state will have an investment in this as time goes past, given it is an overarching body of local government. We don't want to see you facing generational debt and high interest rates over a very long period. 21 years could blow out further and further. Councils tend to run these loans out. When they get to a point where they find they can't manage the interest payments, they extend the loans. That creates greater capacity for increases in interest, and no doubt your sons and your daughters will be saddled with this debt, which we're about to decide on at this stage. I do congratulate Ben and Sam. I'm not singling out councillors generally, but you'd have to say they've been the lone voices in council in relation to and that's not to suggest councillors generally have not been performing their task, but it is important councillors ask the hard questions in council, and I do congratulate them. It's hard to stand aside from your peers and your councillors in raising questions that obviously are not comfortable within council, but we need councillors like that to ask the hard questions, and I do congratulate, as I said, Ben and Samantha. So, just in closing, as I said, I've got an office in Ballarat. I'm open to anyone that wants to express points of views or get me to represent them in a political arena in relation to this project. I think it raises a number of concerns itself, and you'll hear about that this afternoon. We still have control of some of the decision-making process within this project, and certainly I'll be looking forward to hearing through Marita if I have to leave the views that have been expressed at this meeting today. So thank you very much to Elisa, the Ratepayers Association, for inviting me here. Thank you all for coming along, and make sure you are vocal. You've got a Q&A session, as I understand, at the end. It's important you stand up. I always found at these meetings people sit there and they ponder and think and think, oh God, I wish I'd asked that question at the end. Well, don't be afraid to, because it is important. This is your council. You are going to foot the bill on this one way or another, and you need to have your say today. So it's fully represented when council deliberates again in relation to this project.
Councillors were aware from the outset that the clear road to popularity was retention of the hall, even if its purpose wasn't clear. And failing to resolve the workspace issue and provision of car parks wasn't in the medium term likely to anger the community. The council took the decision to pursue maybe not the most immediately popular course, but the one, in our view, within reasonable cost, gave the best outcomes for the city. None of you are wrong, and your presence here, as Elisa has said and Simon has said, confirms your love for the city and your concern for this very important issue.
I'm nearly 62 years of age, and I have followed public attitudes and press coverage of issues from a very young age. I cannot recall an issue that has generated greater community interest. And I've taken note of Alicia's comment that there's been no less than 75 letters to the editor upon this issue. Now, previously, I have labelled the council attitude on this as very, very much a cart before the horse exercise. We've gone through a number of processes. We're spending money presently on the selected architects in their design work, but we haven't gone through the process of seeing whether or not the land will be made available, or whether the permit for the demolition of the existing Civic Hall will be processed, and whether or not the planning permit for the other new venue will be completed. Why do we need a new town hall facility? From my point of view, what we have is central and it's architecturally significant, very, very much in keeping with the history and culture of Ballarat, and far more. And certainly far more than what I've observed to be the iconic Civic Hall project that we seem hell-bent on constructing at a cost at least double what other developers have been able to construct similar area. We've spent many millions of dollars, I would have thought, recently upon the facade of our, and I would term it iconic. So our Ballarat Town Hall, we've spent many millions of dollars of late on the restoration of the facade and the upper ironworks, etc. All right. 75 letters to the editor. I once heard a former Member of Parliament suggest that A letter to the editor, he reasoned, could be representative of upwards of a couple of hundred people within the community and their views. I have labelled this council willful, stubborn and obstinate in the approach upon this matter. Now, the night that the vote was taken, 10th of August this year, Elisa quite rightly asked that the council defer the vote for a period of 2 to 3 months pending greater community consultation on the project. And I think a good many of us here tonight would A, question whether or not there's any need at all for further council offices. Offices for officers is what we've labelled this. A mad indulgence. A mad indulgence. Then we see, just in the last week or so, that the skate park will have to be relocated. There is no significant demand for this, and there is certainly no need whatsoever for new officers for our council officers. Many of you may be aware that the council presently occupy the Phoenix building in Armstrong Street South. They occupy as a lessee a part of the building constructed in Bath Lane known as the Gordon Building. Now that is a land area that they once owned. That is a land area they once owned, and it's right at the rear of the Civic Hall, of the City Hall, sorry, the Ballarat Town Hall. Now, if we wanted to have all of our people close to each other, which I debate the necessity of, but if we wanted, we ought to have retained the ownership of the Gordon Building site and redeveloped that for council purposes singularly. When I say there's no need, the council presently occupy 2,000, on the Q&A sheet they tell us they occupy 2,575 square metres. This building will be 6,000 square metres. We've got no input as to who is going to tenant the other 3,500 square metres of this building, but we sure as hell hope that it won't be an expansion in staff numbers, that's for sure. It's not been that long since we couldn't get the rubbish bins cleaned out here within Ballarat. Bins were overflowing all over the place. And we tend to have an annual debate as to whether we can afford to keep the swimming pools open in this city. There's scarcely any substantial sporting facilities ever been built by the city of Ballarat. We have the Shire of Ballarat and the foresight of people like Councillor Rex Holyoke to thank for the Ballarat Badminton Stadium and the Ballarat Basketball Stadium and the one-time Ballarat Indoor Tennis Centre. And this council has had 2 subsequent opportunities to purchase the building previously operated as the Ballarat Indoor Tennis Centre, but alas, no money. No money for that. There's the three reasons. No need, we've covered that. No money. The vast majority of us think that when there's countries around the world defaulting on their debt obligations, that it is not the right time for our council to be embarking on a $40 million project with the expectation of raising upwards of $10 million from the sale of buildings. One building we're looking to sell is the former Shire of Ballarat offices, which I understand are currently tenanted. So let's not be hoodwinked there. If we sell it, we lose an income source that probably offsets the cost or the interest rate saving, but we lose a facility that is presently paying its way. Thirdly, we say there's no trust. There's no trust on this matter. I say no trust. This is a headline to do with the sale yards. It's still some weeks away, but the process commenced 5 years ago. 5 years ago. And the officer in charge, the same officer entrusted with the responsibility for this project. People are concerned that the dredging of the lake doesn't appear to have gone well. We had it empty, bone dry for many years, and now we've brought in out-of-town people. We've bypassed the bloke who'd done it for many, many years, and the same officer in charge. We're now looking to attract some alternative operator for the swap meet that's been said to raise and bring 20 million or 10 million to Ballarat, and we've let a successful operator go. So fundamentally, that's it. No need, no money, no trust. Let's stop this economic lunacy, this madness, and basically get council to focus on the basics.
The Civic Hall with its age is, I mean, codes and regulations have changed significantly since that was built, so there'd be significant costs in relation to fire, emergency exits, all those sorts of things that would need to be added on to, rather than just from the structural integrity of the building itself. I haven't had a look at the integrity of the building as a whole, but just from a compliance point of view, that would be one of the major costs that would need to be considered if redeveloping the existing Civic Hall.
Steve, did you want to make a comment on?
Look, I think Darren's certainly in compliance. There would be significant costs. You also need to understand that sustainability in building design is becoming very, very important with our carbon tax issues. All the buildings we're involved in today have got some significant restraints as to how we're allowed to build them, ensuring that these buildings have got significant sustainability benefits. The Civic Hall would have none. Probably gets more benefit by demolishing and recycling as a sustainable outcome. And I think there would be some big issues in trying to accommodate some 1,000 odd people into a building as old as the Civic Hall.
Yeah, could we predict that we're going to need less people in offices in a decade, I guess is sort of the question. I guess we don't have the confidence to do that. The increase in council staff has been, well, you know, over the last 20 years or something like 5% a year or something of that nature. So I guess we're projecting that most of them would be working similarly to what they'd be working in 5 years. And I guess that may be wrong, but if it's right, I guess we've got to make provision for it.
I think we'd be struggling to look for the relationship to heritage in the new structure. I guess we've swapped strip classical for Starship Enterprise. And perhaps we need to rescue the Yellow Peril sculpture from the Contemporary Art Museum in Melbourne to match. Look, I think I'm not sure about the briefing of the architects around what's special about Ballarat and cities like Ballarat. There are plans, I understand, as a result of discussions to retain some timber. That's got nothing really to do with heritage. To retain the outline of the Civic Hall in terms of its shape, for you to remember what you did in the building. But I guess you would have to say that there is very little that actually responds to the precinct in which this building sits. I have to admit that the Civic Hall's in a funny little urban island of its own. But You know, these are challenges for cities. It is on the border of a very significant historic precinct. And the buildings opposite in Mayor Street contribute 100% to the urban character of the city. You take those facades off, there's really special places there. So, you know, whatever we get there, we've also got the glass box next door to reflect that. So, you know, we might have double trouble, but perhaps that will do for me. I thought I've been rude enough, and perhaps I should pass to the engineers.
Yeah, just as an extension of what Mary's saying, just to put everyone's minds at ease, if I can, is council get no special favours here. They have to go through the planning process like Joe Average does, has to go through all the heritage components and everything else. So the idea of spending the dollars now, to the earlier question, is to get that up, and I would hope from sitting back and seeing what I've heard today, council will take on board that the consultation process going forward will be significantly better, that people will be able to look at those drawings, look at how it is in context to what they want, things like traffic, parking, all those sorts of things council need to show to the community how it will work. And everybody here today has the right of objection, and council, in their wisdom as they do now, go through a mediation process for everybody to have their say, and everyone can get the opportunity going forward. They do not get any special favours here.
There's going to be refurbishment costs at the Town Hall and the A Hall. Nowhere we're not asked questions, and I do have to say I've had a meeting with one of Council's accounting staff and asked that very question. We don't know what they'll be, so we can't tell you, and I find that very, very inadequate. Further, when those areas are put back to the community, we must also appreciate there's going to be ongoing staffing costs there. So it's not a case of, look, let's lock this thing in, it's a $30 million loan and there's an interest bill. I don't see that as the end of it, I really don't. One other thing, two other things I'd like to bring up in all this too is, look, I really found the question and answer document of council very, very ordinary and misleading, because it referred to basically the use of $1 million per annum of currently being used to retire debt was thrown into this analysis. I deliberately put it in front of one of my staff and said, what do you think of that answer to the question, that the capital repayments will be an extra $600,000 to $1.2 million per annum? To which he replied, that's not too bad, is it? I said, yes it is, because they're not telling you in plain words that they're also using an additional $1 million. And I don't know who's read what on it, but of the current debt, because we're going to use some of the current debt repayment program for this building, that current debt, which is roughly around the $11 million, will only reduce by $2.5 million over the 20-year period. So current debt is not going to be taken down much at all. So there are a few things. And I guess one other thing I do throw in, and I'd like council to take it on board, and this is, I guess, the accountant coming out of me. Have you considered that if you do rent out space in this new building, you go into competition with commercial landlords in this city, and not only can you affect their cash flow, you can stand to affect the value of their building. As I think it was Peter alluded to before, a building without a tenant will be worth a lot less. So you've got to think of the livelihoods of your, not just your ratepayers, but your ratepayers that are also relying on returns in this city.
This is obviously not a view of council. We know what the view of the council is, and it's important that I do reiterate that there was a vote in the chamber and that there is very resounding support from council for the current proposal that's on the table. I was in Melbourne only the day of that vote in the chamber and drove past the Olver Town Hall, and it totally took my breath. I felt that it was important that I did put the slides up, and I felt that it was important to reiterate the views of some people that I've heard from. We can see here that you can actually reuse a building that's 50 years old. We can see here that you can deal with the fire safety issues, and I've spoken with senior fire officers and managers throughout the region and state that have said that this hall here in Ballarat would also be able to be dealt with today without great difficulty. The slides that we're flicking through at the moment, you would have seen that one before, showed you the plantings outside, some very clever landscape design. These are some photos inside the hall, how it is now. There's some very clever Hollywood-style lighting that you would see if you went to the Heidelberg example. Here's a setting for a community event. There's a number of different ways that Heidelberg used this hall, and just after we had the vote, they had it as a market on the weekend. So it's used in lots of different ways. I suppose the big point here is, you know, polished floors, paint, Hollywood-style lighting, some plantings outside, plenty of space in the 300 hall at the back in 5 years or so when we might need to look at office space, and all sorts of opportunity for car parking at the back for skate park and so on. So I think it is just important that we do not discount the fact that we do have something here that could have something done with it. Again, I reiterate, this is not the view of council, this is just a building that I've seen that's been restored very affordably. In fact, a number of years ago, maybe about 500,000. Obviously, we're a number of years down the track and it would cost more than that, but nowhere near the proposal that's been put on the table. So I just feel that it's right for people to be able to see these slides. You can see there's some clever plantings and it doesn't really look much different to our Civic Hall. I think ours has got pretty windows. Anyway, thank you.
I guess to, like another proposal, like Sam's saying, of having the Civic Hall brought up to like as an entertainment area or as a band entertainment area, and was that ever considered? The answer is probably yes. No, but very early in the proposal, it was a dissimilar proposal. We were conscious that we wanted some office space, we wanted some car parks. We were conscious that that part of the CBD development was probably going to end up as offices along Mayor Street. So it all fitted in there. Now, in as much as where else do you put that type of concert? You're right. Ballarat needs probably not. I would maintain not perhaps the Civic Hall. You would, but within the Eureka complex and in that would be the next proposal that you'd imagine that would merit that sort of support. But you're quite right. The proposal and what we gave the brief to the officers wasn't to consider fixing the Civic Hall. It had all these other caveats to it. Which
never was considered.
No, that's right. It was to, in fact, to have all those things in it, to be able to put council space within it, to be able to put the car parks within the CBD.
Never considered fitting.
No, well, that was the proposal anyway. I'm only saying what's obvious, I guess.